Okay, here we go. A little chat about some specialty situations and that you might run into. Yeah, this is kind of a typical suburban lawn where you have or suburban property. You have a house kind of roughly in the middle, driveway, side yards, front yard, backyard. You might have a separate area for vegetable gardens and recreation, or maybe a patio or things of that nature. Foundation planting. This is what we often see. Unfortunately, what that means is that our yards often look very, very similar. In many cases, we have these large front yards, and we don't really know what to do with them. We don't usually spend a lot of time in our front yards as a society, and so the one purpose that it has is to A, display the lawn, and B, be the curb appeal that people want for the front of their house. That often translates to this. And I have yet to figure out how this is the American dream. And then those plants grow up and do these things. The problem that we have, of course, is that people see this and then they assume that this is what they want in their landscape. Or then you get somebody else who goes, "Oh, I really like plants," and they go off to the store and they buy this, and then these plants become. Is there a house here? What is this front yard? There's no purpose to any of this. As designers, you want to make sure that when you put a plant down, there's a reason for you putting that plant down, or that patio, or that pergola, or that gazebo, or whatever else it is. We have similar issues in the backyard. We feel that it should be a retreat, but then we don't have the ability, or the HOA doesn't allow us to build fences, and then we have these open areas. And how do you do anything in an open area like this? Now, some of the challenges that we have with some of our properties comes from the fact that we obviously have houses on there. So somebody whose house has a backyard that faces west is going to be very sunny in the afternoon when they get home from work, and they may not find that usable. Somebody whose backyard faces north may find it much more chilly and windy, and again, might not make it usable. So our job as designers is to try to change those environmental situations to make their property more usable and more functional. We have these patio areas that are basically useless because of their size. And I get in a picture situation like this, maybe there isn't enough funding to really change things. So I'm not necessarily knocking that, except that how is this space functional? When we design small areas, are they functional areas? Or can we, even if we have to design them small, can we change them to be more usable? If we take a look at this, are we going to really, people be dragging 100-foot hose, 50-foot hose out to a vegetable garden? Why does a vegetable garden have to be banished to the back corner of the yard? Why can it not be moved closer to where the people are going to hang out on a more regular basis? We always want to remember to think about our forms. So when we're looking at form composition, that's always something that we should be looking for. And how can we take something that's really, really cool in terms of the shape and translate that into any size yard? We can find shapes just about any place we look, and we can then translate those shapes to just about anything. It doesn't have to be large portions of the property or the entire thing is that shape. We're just bringing that shape in somewhere. It can be the entire property, and we can do lots of things to make our yards more functional and more usable and also pretty. Because one of the things of landscape design that we often forget is that we're trying to make these yards pretty. So we can do, if you want to look at ovals, for example, you could do ovals as a small backyard patio. And you can see that from the plantings in that upper left corner, that's very simple. There's not a lot of money spent there on the plants, and yet it's creative and unique because of the hardscaping. Let's take the oval out to extreme. This is actually an award-winning design on an old railroad, utilizing that oval and lines. And do something a little bit different. You can make a non-functional yard a functional yard. Here we've got a large retaining wall holding back what would otherwise be a unusable, almost unmowable slope, turning it into something a little bit different by changing up how the hardscaping is done. Finding the views and the pathways and the movement and how we're going to get people from one area to the other, and creating places for people to stop and look and participate in the art that you've created in the garden. If we look at that upper left-hand one, I'm not necessarily advocating removing your entire lawn and putting it all in block, but perhaps this solves a problem. And they've kept some unusual things in terms of how that little planting mound is done. Don't know that that would be applicable for a lot of places here in Ohio, but you always want to try to think of what are creative ways that I can solve whatever problem I'm trying to solve. Putting stepping stones above water so people feel like they're walking on a bridge is unique and creative. Even on a small patio, like on the lower right hand side, where we've got a creative use of the shapes of the flagstones there. Bringing in weird shapes on the bottom of waterways so that you could be able to see those sorts of things. Doing more naturalistic type plantings where we are looking like we're recreating nature. Don't ever forget your small vignettes. You have to remember that human beings really can't concentrate on an entire vista. We want to look at one thing, and when we are looking at that one thing, we see other things, but we don't necessarily notice all the details. So look for little places that you can put little combinations or art or features that force people to look at in a certain area. Utilize plants in a way that you might not have thought to utilize them. Now, yes, this is a large, formal, public garden, but take a look at the pruning of these trees. This is a very specialty style of pruning, and we're utilizing the trees to create the walls rather than a fence. Now, when most of the time we're going to do this in a fence, and sometimes we might do it with a shrub or a hedge, but looking at ways to create garden rooms and enclosures to give people a better sense of privacy in their backyard. Once you've created the room, then people can go into the room and appreciate the art that is the arrangement of the plantings, or in this case also not just the plantings, but the water feature as well. Doesn't have to be big. Here's something very, very similar on a small scale. There's that little vignette that you're going to get people to stop and look and go, oh, that's different. Maybe you're a plant geek and you would like to have lots and lots of plants. Look for places like on that retaining wall right there where you can plant plants in unusual places, places that are unexpected to see plants. There might be some of you out there going, nah, that's way too messy. That's fine. That's fine. Some of you out there are plant geeks and you're going, oh, I can put all kinds of things in all kinds of places. There's always room for all kinds of options. Taking those outdoor settings that we're building so many of nowadays and looking for new ways to bring the garden into that so that you're not just a feature of the hardscapes, but you're combining the hardscapes with the softscapes to make it look almost like an indoor room that is outdoors. Here we've utilized the plantings to create a hallway on the stairs. We've exaggerated that by having the gravel pathway down either side of that to make it look like a hallway. Yes, we're going down the stairs. We've not given you a whole lot to look at. This is for moving people from one part of the yard to the other part of the yard. A lot of times our side yards really are not very functional and we tend to forget about them. Well, think about those as a way to be creative and unusual and do different things. Yes, oftentimes the function is we have to get the equipment like the mower or the wheelbarrow or whatever it is from the front yard to the backyard, or we have to move the people from the backyard to the front yard, or however it is that you're doing things. But you can also make them a place of great beauty, particularly if they're a place where things like turf doesn't grow well. Utilize containers in a way that allows you to bring in plants that might not otherwise grow there. So maybe a client doesn't have a place for a large water feature. Well, here we've got a container that holds water, and they're growing water plants in that. Here we've got plants that might not grow well because the drainage issues in Ohio prevent them from growing well. Put them in a container and you can create the drainage that you want. You have to remember that landscape is an art. And so landscape design is creating artistic situations. Yes, in many cases they're also functional situations, and always function is the thing that you want to look at. Function first. Okay, that if you look at function and what are we doing here, then that'll answer why you're putting something in. In this case, the why might be I need something to look at. I am trying to hide an ugly location, or I would like a water feature, but I don't have a whole lot of space. Okay, so let's do something very small. Utilitarian doesn't have to mean ugly. Steps are often utilitarian, and their only function is to move people from one area to the next or to deal with a grade change. But you can also plant them up and create places of beauty and function. Find unusual ways to plant things, to bring in those vegetables or those climbing plants. A climbing plant, these guys here, These are sweet peas. They're growing up on strings, like fishing line and stuff like that. Well, now you can move those around. You can notice those are on wheels. You can move those around and you can create walls and screening for whatever it is that you need to screen. This is at a nursery, and this is a nursery garden center showing how to create a garden room to allow more functionality on somebody's property. Now, this is an extreme example, but this is a large swimming pool that actually looks out into the ocean. So when you're in the pool, you don't even hardly notice the edges of things. So what is the function? As you're looking at this picture, think of what are the functions of the various areas of this landscape? Because this is not a plant-heavy landscape, and yet it's still very pretty. This is a client or a person who had purchased an old grind mill. And so when they were starting cleaning up the property, they found all of those grindstones all over the place. And so they were starting to incorporate those into their landscape and utilizing those as a feature of the landscape. This is a private home where they've utilized some trees, and you can see very simple paver brick patio there, and created an enclosure that is very difficult to see out and or into, giving a sense of privacy in a very small space. Here's a much larger space. Again, from here, from this angle, you might only see two really major areas. The one on the left with the fountain, and the one on the right with the swimming pool. Now, if this were your house, what is the function of those two areas? Obviously, the swimming pool has a function. What is the function of the fountain there? Why did we put that there? What are the other views that we're generating that you can't see, obviously, from this particular angle of the photograph? This is a front patio that has been enclosed with the sides, and you can see windows looking out. It also has a roof overhead. Yes, it's still completely open to the elements, but it feels like a very private area, a room, if you will. A small hallway doesn't necessarily have to be a way to move people from one area to the next. It can be, well, here's a hallway of water. Because maybe this is an otherwise unusable area or an awkward area. Try to create ways to instill a sense of beauty into areas that can otherwise be difficult to look at. Here is, and you actually saw this house on the midterm. It was a different angle, and you couldn't see all of the different flowers and the different parts of this. So this particular garden has lots and lots of different areas for different functions. So they have the vegetable garden, and they have a flower garden, and they have a cutting garden, and they have lawn, and they actually have water features. And they have in the back a display garden of weird and unusual trees and shrubs. So this is a collector who organized their areas of their yard into different segments. Maybe you have a natural area, and it's difficult to get a lot of different things in there. Okay, so let's keep that as natural as we possibly can. We'll add a few trees and shrubs for some flowering, for some fall color, but keep it more naturalistic. We want to look to Mother Nature to mimic areas. Here we have a hillside that might be dangerous to mow, but water features are perfect for this. And you can see these pondless waterfall give you an area where suddenly it's maybe not usable, but it's functional because it's beautiful and it reduces the maintenance that might otherwise be dangerous. Don't have a place where you can put water, don't have electricity, create water out of stone. So here we're mimicking water without actually utilizing water. I thought this was a really interesting swimming pool when I visited this place, because obviously you have the outdoor area that's the pool, and then we've got another area that is actually a fish pond that looks like it's part of the pool. This is what's underneath the cover, kind of where I'm standing looking out. And this is where we can go and walk around and enjoy the fish without actually having to be in the pool. Those are two separate water systems, because clean water for humans and water for fish are two totally different things. But again, surrounded by plant materials so that you can have a view no matter where you are. This is a very famous public garden, Bouchard Gardens in Vancouver. And this particular area of the garden is very gaudy. The whole point is to have you go, whoa. And I didn't take this picture. I visited this garden, but they look like this, and just to have you go, whoa. And this is actually a garden in a quarry, an old quarry. So you have to go way down into the garden to see the garden. So they've managed to turn what is now an unusable area, a quarry, into a beautiful feature in a garden. Here we're looking at the Toronto Music Gardens. I'm standing up on kind of a patio of an apartment complex, and looking down is a public garden that was based on the fact that a lot of classical music has three different movements. And this is not my picture, but I have visited this garden, and it's really creative in how they have the flow through the garden from one movement to the next. And the nice thing about this particular image is you can really see the three vastly different areas. Most of us don't have that kind of space. So here is a private garden where they're utilizing plants in the pool. Now this is actually a swimming pool. So those plants, that plant there in the middle, is on a separate watering system from the rest of the pool, because obviously you can't use pool water to water plants. So this is somebody who wanted to recreate a natural lake look with a swimming pool. This is the same garden from a slightly different view. And I've used this picture for multiple things to illustrate that you can have interest without a lot of color, because there's not a lot of color going on here. You got some green, some blue, some gray. That's about it. But it's still interesting due to the placement of things, and there's always something to look at. You want something a little bit different, but you need a functional ramp as well. Here we have something a little bit different. So now you can see the form that is happening. Now I'm guessing with this, if you'll notice down over here, they're not going to anything. So probably this is still a landscape in the making, and the function is going to be to get whatever you need down into that yard. You want to do something different with the same form? There it is in more of a lawn, in a public garden setting. Create different areas. And we've learned that we're really not supposed to move water off of our property. It makes it very difficult for smaller gardens to do anything with. So can we create a rain garden? A garden where we're directing all of the water to go there, and the plants that are in that garden are used to having times when they are wet, and then they dry out. And that slows the water movement into the sewer systems. So the next few slides are simply showing you some different examples of how to create similar areas that are side by side, and yet they're vastly different. So you can see the different forms that would occur, whether we're looking at this as a front yard or a backyard or a retreat, or however you want to look at this. Again, same thing. Common lawn areas, sidewalks, two totally different forms, very, very similar development. You want it more naturalistic, or you want angular. Now you can start to see how different forms can work together, creating a similar experience from the homeowner's perspective, but a very different look from the design perspective. There's always a unique and creative way to do things. The thing with landscaping is people want what they see around them, and so that ends up with a lot of landscapes look very, very similar. So when you get that client that enables you to do something totally different, take advantage of that and try to come up with different ways to do things, because there's an infinite way to design a yard. There's an infinite way to design a project. And if you do more than one design and don't just stick with your first idea, you will come up with lots and lots of different things. Some of these ideas you may never actually put into practice because the client doesn't want something that's that odd. But if you're able to keep that creative juices flowing, you can find different solutions for lots of things. Okay, as always, if you got any questions, do not hesitate to get in touch.